Okay, our final presenters, Justin Winters and Chris Hardy, Eco District 2.0, both hailing from Cornell University.
And San Francisco.
And San Francisco. And San Francisco. All right.
So what a great lead-in for this segment of the presentation. And want to say thank you again to everyone for having us here today. And we just want to touch base with what kind of inspired this presentation here. If you all recall, 2012, we had San Francisco had the pleasure of hosting the annual student internship, and the problem set to this group of amazing students was integrating, involving themselves in the San Francisco plan for the Central Corridor District in south of Market Street, the planned eco-district. And as we got engaged with community leaders, with the planning department, we realized that there was a real disconnect between the physical manifestation of landscape and the ideas for this eco-district moving forward. So we wanted to try to get to the bottom of that with our study here.
So today we give you a matinee performance of Ecodistricts Take Root, a drama in 4 acts.
And just to introduce you to the team, I'm Justin.
I'm Chris, and along with us was Gwendolyn, who worked as our summer intern this year, and was also one of the interns who was part of the summer program for Ecodistricts.
And I just want to touch base again on what the goals of the fellowship were. Once again, to establish a role for landscape architecture in the development and design of ecodistricts.
We also really wanted to get into what are ecodistricts really? What do they mean? Is this just another ism? What's the meat behind it? And we also want to identify how do we as SWA interact with sustainable design, and how can we be even better at it than we already are?
And also to develop a plan to sustain momentum moving forward. So we have a play in 4 acts. We're going to start with Act 1, the why. And according to the UN, projections are by 2050, 70% of the world's population will reside in urban areas. 95% of this growth will occur in developing nations. Staggering. This is a paradigm shift. The 21st century will witness an unprecedented growth in urban population. And what does this really mean to us? So let's look at something we're kind of familiar with. Let's start at 1990, and we're going to watch the population of China grow. We've seen a meteoric rise in population thus far, and we understand how that impacted us as a country financially, and also personally as our practice as well. And we see it now topping off at 1 billion by 2050. What does this mean at other countries? Nigeria, for say. Kind of slow start getting to in the past 25 years, but will quadruple by 2050. How about India? Well, India is the fastest growing population in the world, and will more than quadruple their population, another 500 million in the next 20 years. So, in the next 35 years. So definitely potential there for us to be involved.
If you're questioning it, this is all from the UN's projections.
So what does this mean for us? For us in industrialized nations, we're dealing with outdated infrastructure. 19th, 20th century infrastructure as we move into the 21st century. And we understand those impacts upon us. Overseas in developing nations, they don't want to import this technology. They want to have something new. They want to bypass all of the mistakes that we've made. Otherwise, we're going to have a global contaminant on our hands.
And climate change complicates all of this, whereas in the West we have a security net when disaster strikes. When a disaster strikes in developing nations, it's real lives on the line. This looks familiar.
Some of this can be overwhelming.
But the problem solvers are ready. SWA.
So why do we think that we are uniquely qualified to address these problems? Well, first of all, we are global.
Our work is cutting edge and widely influential.
And we know how to do big, and we know how to do urban. So, Act 2, what are we talking about?
So one of the great things about globalization and communication is that the developing world doesn't have to repeat all the mistakes that we had in our industrial revolution. And we see in other areas of technology how developing nations bypass the inefficiencies of the past that we use for development in order to get to the latest and greatest technology. A really common example is cell phones. In most of Africa, you'll see countries that have no landlines are using cell phones everywhere. And it was inefficient to go through the steps of landlines. We think that we're presenting to you a strategy, ecodistrict, that has similar implications for exporting to developing nations.
This is an unfamiliar term to many people, but when you break down the term ecodistrict, what it breaks down to is eco and district means sustainable plus community. We're trying to build the next generation of sustainable urban communities.
Now, there's a lot of room in that definition, and we interviewed leaders from around the country in this movement, planners, professionals, and got their personal definitions as well as their assessments on what this really means. And we saw a huge range in what people thought this could be implemented as. And the result really was based on what the projects were that they were applying this term to. It's very specific.
But there are several commonalities. Most prevalent was scale and cooperation, integration.
So why district? Why is that specific? Click, please.
Basically, let's take a look at a really simple example here. So when we're talking about efficiencies of systems, green systems specifically, let's say you have a single building unit. Well, your cost for that single building is going to be exponentially larger for the amount of impact that you're getting from it. Your savings are going to be that much smaller. But if you move forward into the next slide, please. If you move forward with the growth of the system, the district scale system, you start to see more of a balance of what your investment is and the return you're getting back on it. Obviously, if we move forward to a city scale, you start to see those savings be quite large. How does this look on a graph? So here we see cost effectiveness as you move through the scales. Next slide, please. But you also see a conflicting force, political capacity, start to pull down as you move larger. More players in the game, more difficulty actually getting the crowd behind it. So let's go move forward. And we see where cost effectiveness and political capacity find that sweet spot. Where they merge, that's where you have the most potential to enact the greatest amount of change and get the most return on your investment, the district scale. So, and if we move forward one more slide, we can see that in developing nations, the model actually starts to work in favor. You have the trajectory of the two, political will and cost effectiveness, in line.
So when we look at the industrial city, next, we see all the resources coming in from the hinterlands and being used once, next, and then our refuse and waste is discarded. So green efforts in U.S. cities to date have been primarily based around discrete interventions of green in the city, but this doesn't really address the holistic system of consumption and waste.
This could be, what that represents is that you could have the greenest building in the world, but it could be located in the dirtiest city, and what kind of change are you impacting to the larger good?
Next. So when we look at ecosystems as a precedent, we see that ecosystems use energy and use materials in a cyclical way throughout the trophic scales. And we apply this principle next to ecodistricts. We try to reuse materials as much as we can so that we diminish the amount of material we bring into the city and we diminish the amount of material that we excrete.
A great jumping point from what we just discussed previously. Next, please. Ecodistricts work best at that district scale. We have several different typologies that fit that mold. Campuses, corporate and university, neighborhood policy, mixed-use development, etc.
In our research, when we looked at all of these different kind of typologies, they each had different implications for how you could enact change as an ecodistrict, some of which are more applicable for landscape architecture. Yep. Next.
So in an effort to really see this in an actual application, we traveled to Portland, which is home of the most established eco-district movement in North America. Next, please. The Portland Planning Bureau several years ago established 5 pilot projects within Portland. They identified 5 neighborhoods, each structurally and diversified population-wise, different from each other, but all with the goal of becoming the greenest neighborhoods in the city. Next, please.
So we went to Lloyd District. Lloyd District was what we were told and read about as the most successful example of eco-districts in the United States. And as you can tell, it might be hard to see. We walked around before our interview with the leader, the director of the district, and we took photographs and looked, and we just couldn't really figure out where the district began and where it ended. And this ended up being a problem in the district's success.
Next, please. So it's a mix of light industry, some residential. Next, please.
And this was the one thing that we saw. We're like, haha, it's a bioswale. We're in an eco-district. But apparently these bioswales are part of the standard details for Portland streets. So this actually had nothing to do with the eco-district political initiative.
Next, please. What really set Lloyd Eco District apart was the work that was going on behind the doors, outside of the public eyes. They had some of the most efficient possibilities for large-scale energy exchange between some of their buildings. They had some business agreements that they had private industry supporting them, this effort. So that's what set Lloyd District apart. But for, when we interviewed the administrator for the district, she said that public support was flailing because they did not quite see how it affected them.
They've seen years of planning, and nothing in their neighborhood appears to have changed.
Meanwhile, just across town,
Paradise.
we have the South Waterfront District. Here is an entire neighborhood, new residential mixed-use neighborhood that's been developed, and it was all done outside of the Portland pilot program. Next, please. Why is this? This is a model eco-district community, though. We have alternative transit options out in the public view. Next, please. We have a farmer's market that's selling locally sourced material. Next, please. We have urban agriculture so that all the residents in these large towers have the opportunity to work in the ground to grow their own food. Next, please. We have walkable streets. We have bioswales that are actually thoughtfully engaging these streets, that we're dealing with stormwater in a relevatory manner. Next, please. That's so knitted into the structure of the space that you actually have to engage this bioswale as you get into your house. It's a really well thought out project.
And this has become a model for eco-districts to advertise, to say that this is what we're trying to get at.
Next, please. One of the most engaging elements of this district is this rainwater harvesting collector, cleanser, and reuser. So this is rainwater is collected off of the adjacent towers, residential towers. It's delivered by pipe. Next, please, to this terraced landscape element. It goes through a series of cleansing pools, and then eventually is recharged back into a cistern, and then developed for outdoor uses, irrigation, water features, etc.
And this community is a premium community in Portland in terms of real estate value. People value being part of this infrastructure.
All of this was done, however, outside of the planning district's efforts. This was a single developer with a single design team moving forward on a shared vision. Next, please.
In addition to visiting Portland, we tried to gather as much data as we can on the theory and ideas that went into development of eco-districts and similar initiatives. Next.
So we talked to some of the best and brightest in the design and engineering field and consulting field about eco-districts. People who've had practical experience building these places, studying about these places, talking about these places for quite a while.
We asked them about what they thought the role of landscape or architecture was, how they defined eco-districts, what lessons did they have to apply to new projects. We also went and studied related initiatives and built projects from around the world that had a lot of similarities between them.
As you can see, we have a wide variety of projects here, but you see the built projects all seem to be occurring overseas, whereas the United States have some really amazing projects on the planning boards. One more slide, please. And what we determined from a lot of our research was that overseas, especially in Europe, these were the pet projects of the decision makers in the community, developers, leaders within the community.
Mayors.
Whereas in the U.S., we have this primarily being driven locally by the bureaucracy, the planning boards, planning departments, et cetera, of the cities.
So in the U.S., we're in an advocacy mode. In Europe, it's been part of development.
Next, please. We also studied related initiatives, and all of these initiatives are essentially trying to achieve the exact same goal, creating a greener, more sustainable environment, urban community.
We realized we were studying one ism that was part of a larger family, a movement, if you will.
And through all of our research, we were able to distill what made eco-districts viable and made them important, the elements that made them important. 4 common elements. All eco-districts, successful eco-districts, had sustainable systems involved. They made design a priority. They made cooperation and integration a priority, and they brought it to the surface. And they were all at an urban scale. They all had urban morphology. The density was important. So let's take a look at the cast of characters from a typical industrial urban design project. Traditionally, we have planners, engineers, architects, and landscape architects all working together to bring together an urban development. If we move forward, we find that on eco-district projects where the integration is most crucial, landscape architects are starting to be left behind. They're left away from the table. And why is this happening? We wanted to understand why. So we looked at the roles that the planners, engineers, and architects played.
Next.
And we realized planners, they bring policy and community outreach to the table. Engineers do systems design. Architects are the form givers. Next, please. But landscape, they have their fingers in all of these pockets and all of these services. And it's really important because if we're not at the table, then it's the public realm that suffers. We have an opportunity where eco-districts are trying to become established. It's the public realm that's being left behind. And if landscape is at the table, then the public realm is getting all of these services as well. And people are starting to recognize that their neighborhood means something different.
Next. So from all of this, we gathered a few lessons, but really what we want to share with you today is two key lessons. One lesson was that synergies and landscape systems, when you plan them all together at the same time, are really impressive, and there's an amazing amount of documentation on that. But the second, and probably more applicable to us as a firm, next slide, is that design and planning, and specifically design, is just as important as performance when we look at these landscapes. Without good design, we don't have the kind of social capacity, the political capacity for people to care.
Next, please.
What do we mean by that? We mean identity. If people don't recognize the value of what they're doing to improve their neighborhood, it's going to lose momentum.
Next, please. We're talking about process revelation, people understanding exactly what's at work here, how their neighborhood actually functions, and how they're actually making it better.
The more interesting and charismatic, the more important. So
Very
this touches
important.
in public art. Both of these are public art projects. Seattle, both of them. Placemaking. You know, we'd like to use the example of Teardrop Park, because if you look at Battery Park City, it would be a relatively soulless place on the end of Manhattan without the landscape being the placemaking that makes it family, that makes it community.
Teardrop Park, it brings the poetics to the place.
Yeah.
Next, please.
Next.
And community. What's the most important thing about this effort is community, getting community buy-in. People want to understand that their neighborhood is different than other neighborhoods. People want to do good.
People want to belong.
Yeah, they want to belong. They want to participate. If you give them the opportunity, they will. They're not going to really care about the boiler that's happening, that's chilling out in a large industrial building somewhere. They want to be out in the landscape building planters to beautify their streetscape. Next, please.
So how do we do this? Next.
So as part of our research, we identified specific landscape services that we felt SWA could offer that would help engage us within this eco-district movement.
What's important is both design and performance.
Yes.
Next.
Both are equally important, critically important, because when you bring design and performance landscapes together, you get landscapes acting as systems.
Design landscapes have synergy when engineered for performance.
And performance landscapes are legible and enriching when designed. So let's take a look at a traditional industrial urban model really quickly. We'll run through this. How are the services brought, how is energy introduced into this cycle? So we have water coming in, stormwater coming in, but we have our catch basins quickly moving that water off the city streets. Next, please. Yet we have to cart in water from miles and miles away for a one-time use. Someone needs to flush the toilet, take a shower, brush their teeth. Next, please. We have energy, natural forces coming in, energy actually directly coming into our neighborhoods. But yet most of it is being bounced off the rooftops, absorbed into the blacktops, etc. Yet we're going to be burning, mining and burning fossil fuels from outside of our system, bringing that energy in, again, one-time use, and then we're done. Next, please. And of course, all our raw materials. Now, we're getting better at this. We talked about the example of San Francisco, but there's more that we can do. Raw materials come in, and it goes out as a waste. One-time use generally. Next, please.
So let's review the landscape services and associated technologies that we can deploy for ecodistricts. Next. So we all know stormwater, and we've all been to the education sessions. Stormwater is great, but stormwater is even better when partnered with, next, water efficiency initiatives.
When you partner these two things, you can start to get integrated water management.
Next. When we look at climatization, working with architects to both shelter their buildings, planting things like foundry squares, deciduous trees to make the square more inhabitable in the wintertime. Next. With things like urban agriculture. So let's bring our food to be a local system as part of a larger system, or CSAs.
Taking advantage of those lost spaces that you find so often in urban environments.
Next. Biodiversity in urban environments really helps the resiliency of our plant communities. Next.
Next, please. Transit options, alternative transit options help to build a community-based network of movement. Next, please.
Energy production. When you look at a district scale, we suddenly get high orders of magnitude of efficiency and cost benefit as opposed to individual buildings putting on a solar panel.
Again, the opportunity to take advantage of those lost urban spaces. Next, please. Waste reduction. We talked about some of those technologies and solutions previously, but utilizing, identifying those opportunities within the waste flow, pulling them out and dealing with them locally.
Next. And then finally, ecosystem services. Once we build a healthy ecosystem, it's remarkable how much the ecosystem starts to re-nourish itself. Next. And really the takeaway from all of this is when you plan all these things together, suddenly you find places where water efficiency is helping stormwater, energy production is helping deal with waste in some manner. There's a lot of technologies that actually feed on each other. So if you plan it all out at the beginning, then it helps. And so we have a lot of this categorized in our research documentation that we've collected.
And understanding those integrations with your other consultants, the engineers, the architects, making sure that we're engaged with them from day one to maximize that integration and those synergies.
Next. Again, the consistent elements: design, urban collaboration between different landowners, and sustainable systems. And these can be scaled from something like a SOMA block with certain strategies to something like a new city in India or China, Dongtan, Tianjin. Next.
Next.
So finally, who's going to do this? Next. SWA. Now, we wanted to look at SWA with a critical mind about what we've done for sustainable design going forward and how we can be better at doing sustainable design. Next.
So, and first of all, why should this matter to our team? Why should this matter to SWA?
There's ethics and then there's business.
So looking at the business side of it, green work in 2012 accounted for 38% of total work by AEC industry. Next, please. The projections for 2015, we jump up 22% to 60%. That's quite a rise, and it's projected to keep growing. Next, please.
Now, why is this? For the first time, the majority of green projects are happening because they're more cost efficient for developers to build, not because of ethics. So suddenly the bottom line is saying that green is better. This really kind of changes the game.
Next, please. Let's go back and revisit those eco-district typologies. Next, please. Turns out the SWA is doing quite a lot of this work already. This is much of our bread and butter, our university and corporate campuses, mixed-use developments. So this is something that is really familiar to us. Next, please.
This is a list of up-and-coming projects that are in planning or early phases of documentation of eco-districts or eco-city projects around the world. This is probably the beginning of a wave of what we think will be kind of a global strategy and global movement.
Next, please. Now let's take a look at the competition. I think the point we want to make with this slide is, and I think it's a really important point, is that we have a lot of practitioners out there who are considered to be eco-savvy, to be technically competent and have tremendous expertise in ecosystem and sustainable design. Yet no one thinks any less of their design prowess as well. We're talking about field operations, MVVA, AECOM, etc. Guess what? SWA has that exact same level of technical prowess and design level, and we want to make sure that we highlight that.
Next. So oh, go ahead.
You, sir.
So we looked at SWA's work process. How do we do our work? What's the basics of it? And we tried to find that one thing that would make us, amazing. Next. And we realized we actually have all the bones there. Everywhere we looked to find that gap, we couldn't find it. And what we realized is to better integrate sustainable design into our practice, we kind of needed to look at the whole system. Next. So we identified a long list of questions, which we won't go into, about how are we doing our work and how can we be better at it.
And we came up with
the Integrated Sustainability Initiative Strategy, ISIS. Next.
And ISIS really takes a hard look at three major areas of our firm: project work, and project work, information management, and marketing.
Next.
So let's take a look at project work. We culled through our archives through all the project work we've been doing pretty much the last 25 years, and tried to identify projects with amazing examples of sustainable or green technologies. And we have quite a list here. It was really quite surprising. Next, please.
And we have some exemplary built projects that demonstrate great integration of sustainable design and practice principles into a well-designed landscape.
Next, please.
But we don't really effectively track our sustainable design work. For example, it was about 4 months into this effort that we learned about K-Care. And we were unfamiliar with the project, but we learned about it from Terrapin Bright Green CEO Bill Browning when we were interviewing him. So it took a consultant from New York to tell us that we actually had what he thought was the best model of an eco-district project he had ever seen in his professional experience, which is incredible. But we went back and we're like, oh, how did we miss this? Nobody has done our survey, we didn't see it in the projects folder, and we realized that we're kind of a little too reliant on LEED for tracking our sustainability initiatives in our database.
So we're focused on one of those isms when we have a whole world of isms still working out there. So we think we need to expand that definition of sustainability.
Next.
Please. So with our project work, we propose tracking projects from the moment we present a job open all the way through post-occupancy, adding tags for sustainable performance at every step of the way. This way we're able to best analyze what projects we can track for our for marketing purposes, for educational purposes, but also it provides us an opportunity to keep better handle on the metrics, which are really important going forward with clientele.
Next. We also looked at information management, and we have a lot of great tools that a lot of firms don't have. Next. But we think that there's still opportunities for increased efficiency and education improvements. Next. So what we started with was making a digital sustainability library that we're going to be able to share with all the offices, a consultant spreadsheet of consultants who kind of specialize in this area and that can help us broaden our depth, especially in the sciences. And then some concepts for how we track metrics on ourselves, on our staff, our most valuable resource as a service industry. And we're going to roll this out with synthesis along with Mark's help next spring, the synthesis upgrade to SWAP 2.0. It's going to be amazing. But we also have a variety of other things that we have identified that we're going to compile into the ISA strategy we'll release with our compendium.
Next, please. So how could this system actually help us in a practical project environment? So it'll help us maximize our resources. So if we move forward, let's recognize that we're a firm spread out globally, 7 offices. Next, please. And let's say that you're one of our offices and you've got a RFP asking for a really well-built team that's focused on specific elements, expertise in green design. But you only have one of those elements within your office. Well, you can go to synthesis. You can type in what you're looking for. Next, please. And the idea is that you can build a team across all offices, that you can put together the most competitive team, that we can go after these projects with the full confidence that we have the best team out there, and the clients will recognize that in our information. Next, please.
We also looked at our marketing. And we have great marketing. We have great marketing people. We have great marketing resources. We've targeted every possible thing, even Twitter, which has negligible benefit. So we have no complaint with that. But we found, next slide, kind of a philosophical approach to sustainability in our marketing that we think might not be optimized. We don't really explicitly market our sustainable features. And we understand that this has been kind of a historical decision based on the idea of not seeing sustainability as a project typology separate from our regular work. And we agree with that. We don't challenge that notion. But what we do think is that the sustainable features of our work, the best practices that we should ideally be doing everywhere, should be celebrated, and it should be put into a simple, understandable narrative.
Next, please.
Right now, we're kind of relying on subtlety in our marketing. People have to dig to find the sustainability in our projects.
Next, please.
And sometimes subtlety can result in the message being lost. Next, please.
Next, please. So what we're proposing here is that we're proposing doing addendum, doing integration into our existing marketing structure, thinking about adding a sustainability tab to our webpage, something that's easy for clients to find, and if they've got questions, it's right there available to them, but something that's not dominating our website. Doing a sustainability addendum to our brochure, something that would highlight those expertise, those levels of technical prowess that we understand. That would also help educate our clients. And then, speaking of education, really to highlight the white papers and the presentations that the principals are already currently involved in, making those available on our website so that people understand that we're actively engaged in this kind of research.
None of these are unusual suggestions, and they're all minor tweakings of what we already do. It's what our competition does. So, So all of this and some more kind of bureaucratic stuff we have that we're going to compile into our compendium. We'll share with you guys
We'll be
next spring.
rolling out spring 2014.
Woo woo. Next.
So finally, we want to talk about that implementing, curating, enabling, and promoting this initiative will require time and accountability. Next, please. This means dedicated time. This isn't time added to somebody's already overpacked work schedule. This means dedicating time and resources to a real effort. Next, please.
So this could happen through billable hours, akin to what we did with the post-occupancy initiative this year, which hopefully people will think is really valuable.
Next, please. And so some firms have dedicated time with a specific job description. Specifically, we can cite Gensler, AECOM, and we think this might be one possible option for SWA.
Next, please. So looking at the next steps, spring 2014, we're going to share the compendium with our ISIS strategy. We're going to look to the executive committee for what kind of leadership should we roll out to continue this work forward. And we're also going to take all of the resources we've had, share it with Mark, get it into synthesis, and get it into your offices.
Fall 2014, development of a tracking system, development of continuing education, and developing of marketing materials so we can start to get the rollout ready for spring 2015.
Next. So SWA has the portfolio, the experience, and the infrastructure to be a recognized leader in sustainable design.
Next, please. And planning. Thank you.
And planning, yeah.
Yes, and planning,
Yeah.
if you didn't catch that. Next, please.
So let's get the word out.
One more. Yay.
Yay.
That's it. Thank you. Next, please.
Thanks, guys. One more slide.
One more time. I'm sorry. There's one follow-up slide.
Just thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for the support and the opportunity to do this. Specifically, thank you to Renee for his mentorship and ideas.